A dramatic day in South African politics, one that we'll look back on as a potential historical turning point. We've got a president, speaker, deputy speaker, and a clear coalition forming, which has confounded all kinds of expectations. Let's get into it. This is going to be a deep dive. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX, your number one destination for current affairs insight in South African politics. And we have just witnessed a very important day in South African political history. And again, as we reflect on the day-to-day and the now, it's easy to lose the historical importance of what we've seen. But I think this moment will probably mark something like a crucial turning point in the next phase of South Africa's democracy. In today's episode, first I want to unpack what we've seen in the National Assembly and in some provincial legislatures, and particularly the president, the speaker, the deputy speaker, and all of those elections, because I think they're really important, which will build us onto an important discussion, which is, as we have constantly been saying on this channel for a while now, it looks like we're heading into a very particular coalition. That coalition revealed itself in truth today, and that is the grand coalition of a special type between the ANC, the DA, and other minor partners. I want to have a look at what that really means. What are the opportunities for this new government, a government unlike which we have ever seen before? What are the kinds of things this government needs to do to reassure citizens? What are the opportunities it faces to prove naysayers wrong? And what are the threats that this government faces? What are the fears that people will be feeling around this government? And so I want to have a look at those two aspects. Now, let's start with what we saw today, because there was some talk earlier in the morning that things were fluid, things were uncertain. Last night, the night before the first sitting of Parliament, the EFF attempted to woo the ANC back, find a place for itself within the government of national unity, even if this was in the legislative sphere, potentially getting the speaker or some kind of chairpersonship in an important parliamentary portfolio committee, deputy speaker. And there was some uncertainty last night as to whether this attempt of the EFF in the 11th hour, as it seemed to be, would prove successful in swaying the ANC to make this coalition arrangement that it has with the DA, IFP, and the PA now, maybe more inclusive, particularly to include some parts of the South African electorate that are not traditionally on the center right of the economic spectrum. Now, in the morning, on the outskirts of the National Assembly, I spoke to a few politicians from different perspectives and different parties, and they said, we also don't know what's going to happen. So it looks like this went down to the wire, but ultimately the ANC and the DA were able to find each other. Actually, as the swearing in of MPs was happening, we then got this announcement out of nowhere, it seemed, that this framework coalition had been agreed between the parties, and that the grand coalition, a grand coalition is a coalition between the two biggest parties who are on opposite sides of the ideological spectrum. So it's typically with two parties, but this is a grand coalition of a special type because it's the two parties and they've got minor players adding to it. The grand coalition was announced. And what we saw reinforced that, because we had the election of speaker and really it wasn't even close. The EFF fielded their candidate, Veronica Mente. The ANC fielded its candidate, Togo Didiza. And very interestingly, the DA didn't field a candidate, which just represented the cooperation between those parties. And it's kind of crazy to even be saying that. Like, if this was 5 years ago and we were talking about cooperation in parliament between the ANC and the DA to elect a speaker, you would think I was from another planet. But we are in another political planet now. So Togo Didiza obviously gets elected, and this is a massive moment which proves that the ANC and DA are collaborating. And soon after that, we also see that in KZN, where things are on a knife's edge, and the MK party plus the EFF have 39 seats, and the ANC, IFP, and DA have 40 seats, and they both needed, or they have, it's 40-40. I can't remember the exact balance, but it's right there. Each of those two blocks needed the NFP to vote with them. And the ANC-DA plus coalition was able to hold solid and bring the NFP in, and they were able to elect a speaker. And that's when it became clear that, wow, this coalition is not just holding nationally, but it's going to, the dominoes are going to fall provincially as well. And then we saw the election of Banyaza Lesufi with the cooperation of the DA in Gauteng. And so now what we actually have when we take a step back and we look at it is, this is what we have before us. We have the ANC-DA plus grand coalition of a special type, which is going to be in charge nationally. We have the DA running the Western Cape outright. We have the grand coalition in Gauteng and the grand coalition in KwaZulu-Natal. So in the three economic spheres of South Africa, the three biggest economic provinces, Gauteng, KZN, Western Cape, the ANC no longer governs outright, but it still has a say in at least two of those three provinces. And I must say that the DA-ANC coalition resurrected the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, which had fallen from a majority all the way down to something like 17%, and yet was able to rebound into the speaker's chair in KZN. We've also got this government led by President Cyril Ramaphosa, re-elected today in Parliament in an unsurprising move, but a move that I think is very interesting and important, because Cyril Ramaphosa as a political figure has always been able to stabilize his role within the ANC by generating coalitions outside the party that would assist him to unite the party internally. We know that he had big help from funders and big business when he ran for ANC president, and that assistance from external capital helped him to stabilize his position within the party. Now we see President Ramaphosa stabilizing his internal position by finding partnerships outside the party that have brought him back at the helm of the South African government. And Ramaphosa's credibility outside the ANC has ironically become his biggest asset inside the ANC, at least as we stand, because now he has been able to say that he was the person who brought together this firm coalition, which has brought the ANC back into power in places it should never even have dreamed of being back in power, falling really far, the electorate really sending a strong message of rejection, and yet the ANC, for my money, should be over the moon with what it has been able to do in these different legislatures. The electorate rejected the ANC big time in this election, but they found themselves back in the speakership of the National Assembly, speakership in KZN, premiership in KwaZulu, in KZN, premiership in Gauteng, various premierships across the country. So in many ways, the ANC has bounced back in terms of the power it wields in the state. So that's really what we saw today. And ultimately, we see speeches and acts of conciliation across these aisles where the message is trying to be sent from this grand coalition that it's actually time for these parties to unite and put the country's interests first. So I want to come onto this grand coalition of a special type and explain why I think this is a pivotal moment in South African history, but also look at what the strengths and weaknesses or opportunities and threats for this government could be. And because I've been very critical of this idea, largely because people have painted it as a government of national unity, which I think we can now all agree it is not, we still need to have a look at this government and say, what could the positives be? Because it's important to be dispassionate in our analysis and look at it from multiple perspectives. That's what we always promise you on this channel. So I think a first opportunity for this new government is going to be the size of cabinet. It would be a very far-sighted thing to do for this government to actually say, you know what, even though it would be politically useful for us to expand cabinet, because then we can have more parties and share power more easily and distribute patronage more easily. And in that way, what you'll see is the patronage system, which used to be within the ANC, might be externalized outside the ANC. We can come together as a government, and this is what I hope people are advising this government, and say, government is bloated, there are too many deputy ministries, there may even be too many ministries which can be consolidated, and this is a unique opportunity to set South Africa on a new trajectory of cleaner and less bloated government. And I think that would be a really bold first step to say, actually, we are cutting the size of cabinet. We're using this political opportunity. That's the kind of thing that would give this new government a sense of credibility right off the bat. If they don't do that, and if they fall back on the old ways of, we'll keep the same size or enlarge cabinet and give away all these deputy ministries, then it's just going to look like the same old thing and old wine in new bottles. So that would be the first test. And I think President Ramaphosa failed that test in his last presidency, because everyone is really keen to see what cabinet will President Ramaphosa announce. He had already promised to cut cabinet, and eventually he fell victim to the internal politics of the ANC, and he tried to placate everyone in the party and kept cabinet big so that he could distribute positions and balance factions. Had he been more decisive, I think his administration would have got off on the right foot, and that's what his second administration must do. I think another opportunity is, of course, to make governance stable, right? And Tigile Mbalula in his press conference yesterday made an interesting point, which I thought was worth reflecting on, where he said that there's market stability, and that's important, and there's economic stability, which has been in the headlines a lot over the last few weeks of these coalition talks. Has it been a few weeks? Yeah, it's been 2 weeks, /2 years, /2 decades since the election. But he said, what you first have to do before you get market stability or economic stability or social stability, there are different kinds of stability that we need to balance as a country. You need governance stability. And we haven't had governance stability in places like the city of Joburg, in places like Nelson Mandela Bay. And so what we can't have as a country, as we are already ailing as an economy and we have a deeply unjust society, we can't have a situation where on top of that, we're changing governments every day and we're changing presidents left, right, and center. So this is an opportunity for a government that has a firm majority to make sure that South Africans are not worried about where leadership lies. And from that base of stability, this government can look forward and plan its economic, social, and geopolitical policy. Now, I've already spoken about some of the threats to that stability, particularly the Phala situation, and that's a cloud that hangs over Ramaphosa. But if you want to know more about that, check out my video, which delves into that. So I think that's an opportunity for this government to say, look, you may not like us, but we provide a sense of stability in governance. You know what you're going to get. And now, at least for the next foreseeable future, I would say at least until the local government elections, but hopefully beyond that, there's a sense of governance stability. Of course, the ultimate test for this new government is going to be to what extent can it actually deliver on the promise of economic growth, economic prosperity, and not just growth for millionaires and billionaires and the people who've had it good for the last 30 years and the last 100 years, but can it change the lives of those who are yet to taste the fruits of freedom? That is the ultimate test for this government and any government. And any government that does that will become popular, and any government that doesn't will always have been a failure. I think there is one other big opportunity which I think the DA might be able to grasp. And if they were able to do this, they would deserve credit. We know that the South African state is in a broken position, and particularly the civil service and public administration more widely has been racked by problems of its links to ANC patronage, so that even the most junior positions often in the South African state rely on having some kind of relationship with the ANC before you can actually deliver to the people. And a big opportunity for this government, since there is no more a majority party that determines who goes in every corner of the state, is to say, we are going to ambitiously professionalize the civil service. We're not going to make it a DA civil service. We're not going to make it an ANC civil service. But this government's most lasting contribution could be, we are going to make this a professional civil service which is dedicated to delivering to the people, that has the capacity to do the basics right. And any government in the future will be able to rely on that kind of civil service as they build on their different policy proposals. So I think those are some of the main opportunities that I foresee that are presented to this government. And those are the kinds of things that this government will have to do to reassure South Africans that this is not a gimmick, it's not a flash in the pan, and this is not, even worse, some kind of retrogressive alliance of hyper elites. And on that subject, I want to get on to the next point, which is about the threats that I see from this moment. There are a lot of people who are messaging me increasingly wherever I go. People are saying they watch the show, they want to talk, they have their opinions. And I think there are a lot of people who are quite sad, who feel dejected, who feel like this moment is a moment of defeat because the EFF MK party have been defeated. They don't have a say. And even if you don't like them, that section of the electorate, and to the extent that they have a legitimate call to a more just society, has been excluded. But more than that, there are those, and we know that many people don't like the DA. Yes, they got 20% of the vote, but they also antagonized a great section of the electorate. And so there are people who feel like the DA is in charge now, and that means that the forces of conservatism, the forces of white regression, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all white people are regressive, but I'm saying that there's a regressive element within white South Africa that can be represented in the DA, which now has a certain amount of power. That is something that scares people. And if you don't like that and you don't understand that, then you're not in touch with South Africa as it really exists. You live in some kind of dream world. So I'm getting a lot of people who are sharing anxieties. And I think this government has a lot of work to do. And I don't know if it can do it, but to reassure South Africans that questions of transformation are not going to be on the table. And questions of racial justice, which are so central to our country's history, are still going to be a priority, at least of the ANC, which leads this government, even if the DA doesn't like it very much. And the ANC is going to have to use its leadership role, even if it's a much diminished party from within this government, to completely dismiss any attempt to change the agenda of this government to be about the retrogressive aspects and the unpopular aspects of DA policy. So that is a threat. And if the DA overplays its hand on that score, I can assure you they will reap a whirlwind. And this government will not last very long. And in fact, the ANC will decide, based on the public backlash, that it was a bad idea and they better turn to their other allies who will be more dependable partners. So I think that's a particular threat. Another threat is, of course, corruption. And what happens with those people within the ANC, never mind the president, who are currently facing corruption allegations? And if the state moves swiftly against them, will there be some kind of backlash? How will the ANC handle it? And how will the DA handle it? Because the DA may be in a difficult position if it doesn't get tough on ANC corruption, even if the ANC is a partner of the DA. Then their anti-corruption stance will start to become watered down and they become part of the corruption problem, not an antidote to it. So I think I would be paying very careful attention to how this government negotiates questions of state capture, questions of corruption. And don't forget, it's not just about past corruption scandals. Don't worry, the ANC always has corruption scandals. There will be future corruption scandals that come from within the government. And we'll have to see the backbone that this government has and the backbone the DA will have to deal with corruption when they are the government, not the opposition. Now, another threat just comes from questions of stability, right? When we look at KZN, I do have a worry about the MK party and the fact that despite being the largest party by a long shot and being double the size of other parties, they've been actively excluded from KZN, which was something that I warned against. Of course, former President Zuma is not going to be happy. I understand he's going to be addressing a press conference on Sunday, and somehow this government, now that it's in a leadership position, it has the responsibility of easing tensions, calming tensions, and making sure that political disputes don't boil over and spill over into larger and wider social disputes. So stability will not just be market stability or governance stability. It will be social stability, and particularly the stability that can be retained in a province like KwaZulu-Natal, which we know has typically been an unstable place relatively in South Africa when it comes to questions of political turmoil. So those are some of the key questions that I think emerge from this moment. A final question that I think emerges from this moment is, where is opposition? The EFF has come out rightly to say that they are switching strategies. They're moving from disruption to a more robust parliamentary opposition. I think that's good, but the EFF only represents 10%. Does MK come into parliament, and what kind of opposition role do they play? These parties have a really, really heavy responsibility to play a role in contrast to a very large governing coalition. So the size and scope of opposition politics in South Africa has shrunk. And then there's a question of outside parliament. What does society do to hold this government accountable? And here I'll end, because I really think the mistake South Africa made, a mistake I warned against, along with others like Stembile Mbete and Lukhona Mnguni, Tessa Dooms, some of whom are now analysts on SMWX, is when the so-called New Dawn, which did not dawn, happened. There were elements of commercial media in South Africa that saw it as their role to become praise singers for the government and the Ramaphosa agenda. And what happened there was that the government then became even more unaccountable because it knew there was no media pressure. So we cannot, as a society and as a country, and I am certainly not going to, with my sphere of influence, tolerate any attempts to mollycoddle this government into thinking that it can get away with things that it should not be getting away with. From the word go, while we hold a sense of hope always for the future, no matter what happens and what government is in office, we have to ensure that we are holding this government accountable from day one, and that they know that if they so much as deviate 1 inch in the wrong direction, society will be there to counter. Whether there's an opposition in parliament that's there to counter as well is just a bonus. So I would implore those in the media, those in civil society, you with your voice on social media and in your circles, not to become a praise singer for any government, anywhere, any coalition, but to always make sure that the government knows that this electorate can throw you out. It can topple a liberation movement. If it can topple a liberation movement, it can topple a coalition. And so I'm hoping that this government is kept on its toes by those aspects of society and by those corners of society whose job it is, judicial, academics, everyone, to hold government to account instead of to sing its praises. So those are some thoughts from today, this turning point in South African history. I wonder how we'll look back on this day in 5, 10, 20 years. I think we may also be going into a really fascinating period where it may be time to rethink a lot of our old assumptions. constitutional assumptions, economic assumptions, political assumptions. And maybe, just maybe, within this moment of upheaval, we can find space to have creative conversations that break free of some of the assumptions that we have held for 30 years, which have not unlocked and unleashed the kind of country that we all know we can be. Thank you so much for watching SMWX. I hope you like the hoodie. Make sure you check the link in the description below if you want to buy one, delivering to all places in South Africa. Check out some of the people who have helped us on our trip to Parliament and some of the companies that have helped us to get here. It's great to see advertising growing on this channel as well. If you want to become an advertiser, you can contact us in the description. There are all those details down below. But most importantly, thank you for sharing this with your friends, your family, even just for watching it in your private moments and thinking about South African politics along with me. Like, share, comment down below. Let me hear some of your thoughts. You don't have to agree. This is a place of democratic discussion and debate. This is a grand coalition of SMWX family. Welcome aboard to the family if you're new around here, and stay locked on SMWX. Aye. I just also like to thank two companies that are part of this SMWX community who have really helped us on this Cape Town trip to bring you all the content we're going to bring you. The first company is Black Brick. They have accommodated the SMWX team and also given you this wonderful venue from which we're going to shoot some content when we're not at Parliament. So I'd really like to thank the people at Black Brick in Cape Town, but they're also in multiple places in South Africa. If you're ever looking for excellent accommodation, make sure you check out Black Brick. And I'd also like to thank the people at Lula who are helping to transport the SMWX crew as we bring you this coverage. Lula's a company that takes particularly crews and companies and workers, whether you're going to a festival or you have an off-site event where you're transporting lots of people. Lula gets you from A to B in a really seamless way. And I want to give a big shout out to Lula. Thank you for watching this channel. Thank you for continuing to build and grow this channel into an important, independent digital force in South African politics. And I think after this government is formed, we might just be that crucial counterweight, that crucial critical voice that our country very much needs. See you in the comments. Aye.